That perturbating was caused by the new planet. That Washington Observatory may throw as much doubt as it wants to. It cannot affect me because no, there is a new planet. I know it because I don't perturbate for nothing. There has got to be a dog or a planet, one or the other, and there isn't any dog around here, so there's got to be a planet. I hope it is going to be named after me. I should just love it if I can't have a constellation. Marjorie Fleming, The Wonder. Child. Marjorie has been in her tiny grave 100 years, and still the tears fall for her and will fall. What an intensely human little creature she was. How vividly she lived her small life. How impulsive she was. How sudden, how tempestuous, how tender, how loving, how sweet, how loyal, how rebellious, how repentant, how wise, how unwise, how bursting with fun, how frank, how free, how honest, how innocently bad, how natively good, how charged with quaint philosophies, how winning, how precious, how adorable and how perennially and indestructibly interesting. And all this exhibited, proved, and recorded before she reached the end of her 9th year and fell on sleep. Geographically considered, the lassie was a Scot. But in fact she had no frontiers, she was the world's child, she was the human race in little. It is one of the prides of my life that the first time I ever heard her name it came from the lips of Dr. John Brown, his very own self, Dr. John Brown, of Edinburgh, Dr. John Brown, of Rab and his friends, Dr. John Brown of the beautiful face and the sweet spirit, whose friends loved him with a love that was worshipped, Dr. John Brown, who was Marjorie's biographer, and who had clasped an aged hand that had cursed Marjorie's 50 years before, thus linking me with that precious child by an unbroken chain of handshakes, for I had shaken hands with Dr. John. This was in Edinburgh 36 years ago. He gave my wife his little biography of Marjorie, and I have it yet. Is Marjorie known in America? No, at least to only a few. When Mr. L. Macbean's new and enlarged and charming biography of her was published 5 years ago, it was sent over here in sheets, the market not being large enough to justify recomposing and reprinting it on our side of the water. I find that there are even cultivated Scotchmen among us who have not heard of Marjorie Fleming. She was born in Kirkcaldy in 1803, and she died when she was 8 years and 11 months old. By the time she was 5 years old, she was become a devourer of various kinds of literature, both heavy and light, and was also become a quaint and free-spoken and charming little thinker and philosopher, whose views were a delightful jumble of first-hand cloth of gold and second-hand rags. When she was 6, she opened up that rich mine, her journals, and continued to work it by spells during the remainder of her brief life. She was a pet of Walter Scott from the cradle, and when he could have her society for a few hours, he was content and required no other. Her little head was full of noble passages from Shakespeare and other favorites, 360 of hers, and the fact that she could deliver them with moving effect is proof that her elocution was a born gift with her, and not a mechanical reproduction of somebody else's art, for a child's parrot work does not move. When she was a little creature of 7 years, Sir Walter Scott would read ballads to her in his own glorious way, the two getting wild with excitement over them, and he would take her on his knee and make her repeat Constance's speeches in King John till he swayed to and fro, sobbing his fill. Sobbing his fill, that great man over that little thing's inspired interpretations. It is a striking picture, there is no mate to it, Sir Walter said of her. She's the most extraordinary creature I ever met with, and her repeating of Shakespeare overpowers me as nothing else does. She spent the whole of her little life in a Presbyterian heaven, yet she was not affected by it. She could not have been happier if she had been in the other heaven. She was made out of thunderstorms and sunshine, and not even her little perfunctory pieties and shop-made holiness could squelch her spirits or put out her fires for long. Under pressure of a pestering sense of duty, she heaves a shovelful of trade godliness into her journals every little while, but it does not offend, for none of it is her own. It is all borrowed, it is a convention, a custom of her environment, it is the most innocent of hypocrisies, and this tainted butter of hers soon gets to be as delicious to the reader as are the stunning and worldly sincerities 361 she splatters around it every time her pen takes a fresh breath. The adorable child. She hasn't a discoverable blemish in her makeup anywhere. Marjorie's first letter was written before she was 6 years old. It was to her cousin, Issa Keith, a young lady of whom she was passionately fond. It was done in a sprawling hand, 10 words to the page, and in those foolscap days, a page was a spacious thing. My dear Issa, I now sit down on my bottom to answer all the kind and beloved letters which you was so good as to write to me. This is the first time I ever wrote a letter in my life. Miss Potun, a lady of my acquaintance, praises me dreadfully. I repeated something out of Dean Swift, and she said I was fit for the stage, and you may think I was primed up with majestic pride. But upon my word, I felt myself turn a little burse is a word which is a word that William composed, which is, as you may suppose, a little enraged. This horrid fat simpleton says that my aunt is beautiful, which is entirely impossible, for that is not her nature. Frank, yes, Marjorie was that. And during the brief moment that she enchanted this dull earth with her presence, she was the bewitchingest speller and punctuator in all Christendom. The average child of 6 prints its correspondence in rickety and reeling Roman capitals, or dictates to Mama, who puts the little chap's message 362 on paper. The sentences are labored, repetitious, and slow. There are but 3 or 4 of them. They deal in information solely, they contain no ideas, they venture no judgments, no opinions. They inform Papa that the cat has had kittens again, that Mary has a new doll that can wink, that Tommy has lost his top. And will Papa come soon and bring the writer something nice? But with Marjorie it is different. She needs no amanuensis, she puts her message on paper herself, and not in weak and tottering Roman capitals, but in a thundering hand that can be heard a mile and be read across the square without glasses. And she doesn't have to study and puzzle and search her head for something to say. No, she had only to connect the pen with the paper and turn on the current. The words spring forth at once, and go chasing after each other like leaves dancing down a stream. For she has a faculty, has Marjorie. Indeed, yes, when she sits down on her bottom to do a letter, there isn't going to be any lack of materials, nor of fluency, and neither is her letter going to be wanting in pepper, or vinegar, or vitriol, or any of the other condiments employed by genius to save a literary work of art from flatness and vapidity. And as for judgments and opinions, they are as commodiously in her line as they are in the Lord Chief Justice's. They have weight, too, and are convincing. For instance, for 36 years they have damaged that horrid simpleton in my eyes, and more than that, they have even imposed upon me, and most unfairly and unwarrantably, an aversion 363 to the horrid fat simpleton's name, a perfectly innocent name, and yet, because of the prejudice against it with which this child has poisoned my mind for a generation, I cannot see Potun on paper and keep my gorge from rising. In her journals, Marjorie changes her subject whenever she wants to, and that is pretty often. When the deep moralities pay her a passing visit, she registers them. Meantime, if a cherished love passage drifts across her memory, she shoves it into the midst of the moralities. It is nothing to her that it may not feel at home there. We should not be happy at the death of our fellow creatures, for they love life like us. Love your neighbor, and he will love you. Bountifulness and mercifulness are always rewarded. In my travels I met with a handsome lad named Charles Balfour S., and from him I got offers of marriage, did I say? Nay, plainly loved me. Goodness does not belong to the wicked, but badness, dishonor befouls wickedness, but not virtue. No disgrace befouls virtue. Perseverance overcomes almost all difficulties. No, I am wrong in saying almost, I should say always, as it is so. Perseverance is a virtue. My Seesawson says patience is a Christian virtue, which is true. She is not copying these profundities out of a book, she is getting them out of her memory. Her spelling shows that the book is not before her. The easy and effortless flow of her talk is a marvelous thing in a baby of her age. Her interests are as wide and varied as a grown person's. She discusses all sorts of books and fearlessly delivers judgment upon them. 364 She examines whomsoever crosses the field of her vision, and again delivers a verdict. She dips into religion and history, and even into politics. She takes a shy at the news of the day and comments upon it, and now and then she drops into poetry and to rhyme, at any rate. Marjorie would not intentionally mislead anyone, but she has just been making a remark which moves me to hoist a danger signal for the protection of the modern reader. It is this one. In my travels, naturally we are apt to clothe a word with its present-day meaning, the meaning we are used to, the meaning we are familiar with. And so, well, you get the idea. Some words that are giants today were very small dwarfs a century ago, and if we are not careful to take that vast enlargement into account when we run across them in the literatures of the past, they are apt to convey to us a distinctly wrong impression. Today, when a person says, "in my travels," he means that he has been around the globe 19 or 20 times, and we so understand him. And so, when Marjorie says it, it startles us for a moment, for it gives us the impression that she has been around it 14 or 15 times, whereas such is not at all the case. She has traveled prodigiously for her day, but not for ours. She had traveled, altogether, 3 miles by land and 8 by water per ferryboat. She is fairly and justly proud of it, for it is the exact equivalent, in grandeur and impressiveness, in the case of a child of our day, to 2 trips across the Atlantic and 1,000 miles by raw. In the love novels, all the heroines are very desperate. Isabella will not allow me to speak about lovers and heroines, and 'tis too refined for my taste. A lodestone is a curious thing. Indeed, it is true heroic love doth never win disgrace. This is my maxim, and I will follow it forever. Miss Eggard's tales are very good, particularly some that are very much adopted for youth, as Lazy Lawrence Tarleton False Key, and C persons of the Parliament House are, as I think, called advocates. Mr. Key and Mr. Crakey has that honor. This has been a very mild winter. Mr. Bainster's budget is tonight. I hope it will be a good one. A great many authors have expressed themselves too sentimentally. The mercantile affairs are in a perilous situation. Sickness and a delicante frame I have not, and I do not know what it is, but ah me, perhaps I shall have it. Grandeur reigns in Edinburgh. Thomson is a beautiful author and pope, but nothing is like Shakespeare, of which I have a little knowledge of. An unfortunate death James the Five had, for he died of grief. Macbeth is a pretty composition, but awful one. Macbeth is so bad and wicked, but Lady Macbeth is so hardened in guilt, she does not mind her sins and faults. No. A sailor called here to say farewell. It must be dreadful to leave his native country, where he might get a wife, or perhaps me. For I love him very much and with all my heart. But oh, I forgot, Isabella forbid me to speak about love. I wish everybody would follow her example, and be as good as 366 pious and virtuous as she is, and they would get husbands soon enough. Love is a parenthetic thing, as well as troublesome and tiresome. But oh, Isabella forbid me to speak about it. But the little rascal can't keep from speaking about it, because it is her supreme interest in life. Her heart is not capacious enough to hold all the product that is engendered by the ever-occurring inflaming spectacle of man-creatures going by, and the surplus is obliged to spill over. Issa's prohibitions are no sufficient dam for such a discharge. Love, I think, is the Phasian for everybody is marring. Yesterday, a married man named Mr. John Balfour-esque offered to kiss me, and offered to marry me, though the man was espoused, and his wife was present, and said he must ask her permission, but he did not. I think he was ashamed or confounded before 3 gentlemen, Mr. Jobson, and 2 Mr. Kings. I must make room here for another of Marjorie's second-hand high morality outbreaks. They give me a sinful delight which I ought to grieve at, I suppose, but I can't seem to manage it. James Macquarie is to be transported for murder in the flower of his youth. Oh, passion is a terrible thing, for it leads people from sin to sin. At last it gets so far as to come to greater crimes than we thought we could commit, and it must be dreadful to leave his native country and his friends, and to be so disgraced and affronted. That is Marjorie talking shop, dear little diplomat, to please and comfort Mamma and Issa, no doubt. 367. This wee little child has a marvelous range of interests. She reads philosophies, novels, baby books, histories, the mighty poets, reads them with burning interest, and frankly and freely criticizes them all. She revels in storms, sunsets, cloud effects, scenery of mountain, plain, ocean, and forest, and all the other wonders of nature, and sets down her joy in them all. She loves people, she detests people, according to mood and circumstances, and delivers her opinion of them, sometimes seasoned with attar of roses, sometimes with vitriol. In games and all kinds of childish play she is an enthusiast. She adores animals, adores them all. None is too forlorn to fail of favor in her friendly eyes, no creature so humble that she cannot find something in it on which to lavish her caressing worship. I am going tomorrow to a delightful place, Brehead by name, belonging to Mrs. C. R. Rawford, where there is ducks, cocks, hens, boblejocks, 2 dogs, 2 cats, and swine, which is delightful. I think it is shocking to think that the dog and cat should bear them, and they are drowned after all. She is a dear child, a bewitching little scamp, and never dearer, I think, than when the devil has had her in possession, and she is breaking her stormy little heart over the remembrance of it. I confess I have been very more like a little young divil than a creature, for when Isabella went upstairs to teach me religion and my multiplication, and to be good, and all my other lessons, I stamped with my foot and threw my new hat which she had made on the ground, and was sulky, and was dreadfully 368 passionate. But she never whipped me, but said, Marjorie, go into another room, and think what a great crime you are committing, letting your temper get the better of you. But I went so sulkily that the devil got the better of me, but she never whips me, so that I think I would be the better of it, and the next time that I behave ill, I think she should do it, for she never does it. Isabella has given me praise for checking my temper, for I was sulky, even when she was kneeling an whole hour teaching me to write. The wise Isabella The sweet and patient Isabella. It is just 100 years now, May 1909, since the grateful child made that golden picture of you and laid your good heart bare for distant generations to see and bless. 100 years, but if the picture endures 1,000, it will still bring you the blessing, and with it the reverent homage that is your due. You had the seeing eye and the wise head. A fool would have punished Marjorie and wrecked her, but you held your hand, as knowing that when her volcanic fires went down she would repent and grieve and punish herself and be saved. Sometimes when Marjorie was miraculously good, she got a penny for it, and once when she got an entire sixpence, she recognized that it was wealth. This wealth brought joy to her heart. Why? Because she could spend it on somebody else. We who know Marjorie would know that without being told it. I am sorry, often grieved that I was not there, and looking over her shoulder when she was writing down her valued penny 369 rewards. I would have said, "Save that scrap of manuscript, dear. Make a will and leave it to your posterity, to save them from want when penury shall threaten them. A day will come when it will be worth 1,000 guineas, and a later day will come when it will be worth 5,000. Here you are, rejoicing in copper farthings, and don't know that your magic pen is showering gold coin all over the paper. But I was not there to say it. Those who were there did not think to say it. And so there is not a line of that quaint precious cacography in existence today. I have adored Marjorie for 36 years. I have adored her in detail. I have adored the whole of her. But above all other details, just a little above all other details, I have adored her, because she detested that odious and confusing and unvanquishable and unlearnable and shameless invention, the multiplication table. I am now going to tell you the horrible and wretched pledge that my multiplication gives me. You can't conceive it. The most devilish thing is 8 times 8, and 7 times 7. It is what nature itself can't endure. I stand reverently uncovered in the presence of that holy verdict. Here is that person again, whom I so dislike, and for no reason at all, except that my Marjorie doesn't like her. Miss Potun is very fat. She pretends to be very learned. She says she saw a stone that dropped from the skies, but she is a good Christian. 370, of course, stones have fallen from the skies, but I don't believe this horrid fat simpleton had ever seen one that had done it. But even if she had, it was none of her business, and she could have been better employed than in going around exaggerating it and carrying on about it and trying to make trouble with a little child that had never done her any harm. The birds do chirp, the lambs do leap, and nature is clothed with the garments of green, yellow, and white, purple, and red. There is a book that is called the Newgate Calendar that contains all the murders. All the murders, did I say? Nay, all thefts and forgeries that ever were committed, and fills me with horror and consternation. Marjorie is a diligent little student, and her education is always storming along and making great time and lots of noise. Isabella this morning taught me some French words, one of which is bonsoir. The interpretation is good morning. It slanders Isabella, but the slander is not intentional. The main thing to notice is that big word, interpretation. Not many children of Marjorie's age can handle a 5-syllable team in that easy and confident way. It is observable that she frequently employs words of an imposingly formidable size and is manifestly quite familiar with them and not at all afraid of them. Issa is teaching me to make semicolons, knots of interrogations, periods, and commas, and see, as this is Sunday 371, I will meditate up insentiable and religious subjects first. I should be very thankful I am not a beggar as many are. That was the first. She didn't get to her second subject, but got sidetracked by a saner interest and used her time to better purpose. It is melancholy to think that I have so many talents, and many there are that have not had the attention paid to them that I have, and yet they contrive to be better than me. Isabella is far too indulgent to me, and even the Miss Crawfords say that they wonder at her patience with me, and it is indeed true, for my temper is a bad one. The daring child wrote a synopsized history of Mary Queen of Scots and of 5 of the Royal Jameses in rhyme, but never mind, we have no room to discuss it here. Nothing was entirely beyond her literary jurisdiction. If it had occurred to her that the laws of Rome needed codifying, she would have taken a chance at it. Here is a sad note. My religion is greatly falling off because I don't pray with so much attention when I am saying my prayers, and my character is lost among the Breahead people. I hope I will be religious again, but as for regaining my character, I despair of it. When religion and character go, they leave a large vacuum, but there are ways to fill it. I forgot to say, but I've four lovers. The other one is Harry Watson, a very delightful boy. James Keith hardly ever spoke to me, he said, girl. 372 make less noise? Crakey Hall? I walked to that delightful place with a delightful young man beloved by all his friends, and especially by me his loveress. But I must not talk any longer about him, for Issa said it is not proper for to speak of gentlemen, but I will never forget him. The Scythians tribe lived very coarsely, for a glutton introduced to Arsaces the captain of the army. One man who dressed hare and another man who was a good cook. But Arsaces said that he would keep one for brushing his horse's tail and the other to feed his pigs. On Saturday I expected no less than 3 well-made bucks, the names of whom is here advertised. Mr. Geo, Crakey, and W.M. Keith and J.N. Keith the first is the funniest of every one of them. Mr. Crakey and I walked to Crakey Hall hand in hand, in innocence and meditation, sweet thinking on the kind love which flows in our tender-hearted mind, which is overflowing with majestic pleasure. No one was ever so polite to me in the whole state of my existence. Mr. Crakey, you must know, is a great buck and pretty good-looking. For a purpose, I wish the reader to take careful note of these statistics. I am going to tell you of a melancholy story. A young turkey of 2 or 3 months old, would you believe it, the father broke its leg, and he killed another. I think he ought to be transported or hanged. Marjorie wrote some verses about this tragedy, think. I cannot be quite certain it is this one, for in the verses there are 3 deaths, whereas these statistics do not furnish so many. Also in the statistics the father of the deceased is indifferent about the loss he has sustained, whereas in the verses he is not. Also in the 3rd verse, the mother, too, exhibits feeling, whereas in the 2 closing verses of the poem at least it seems to be she is indifferent. At least it looks like indifference to me, and I believe it is indifference. 3 turkeys fare their last of breath, and now this world forever leaved. Their father and their mother too. They sighed and weep as well as you. Indeed, the rats their bones have cranched. Into eternity they're launched. A direful death indeed they had, as wad put any parent mad. But she was more than usual calm. She did not give a single damn. The naughty little scamp, I mean, for not leaving out the L in the word calm, so as to perfect the rhyme. It seems a pity to damage with a lame rhyme a couplet that is otherwise without a blemish. Marjorie wrote 4 journals. She began the first one in January, 1809, when she was just 6 years old, and finished it 5 months later in June. She began the second in the following month, and finished it 6 months afterward, January, 1810, when she was just 7. She began the third one in April, 1810, and finished it in the autumn. 374, she wrote the fourth in the winter of 1810-11, and the last entry in it bears date July 19, 1811, and she died exactly 5 months later, December 19th, aged 8 years and 11 months. It contains her rhymed Scottish histories. Let me quote from Dr. John Brown. The day before her death, Sunday, she sat up in bed, worn and thin, her eye gleaming as with the light of a coming world, and with a tremulous old voice repeated a long poem by Burns Heavy with the shadow of death, and lit with the fantasy of the judgment seat the publican's prayer in paraphrase, beginning, Why am I loth to leave this earthly scene? Have I so found it full of pleasing charms? Some drops of joy, with draughts of ill between. Some gleams of sunshine, mid renewing storms. It is more affecting than we care to say to read her mother's and Isabella Keith's letters written immediately after her death. Old and withered, tattered and pale, they are now, but when you read them, how quick, how throbbing with life and love. How rich in that language of affection which only women, and Shakespeare, and Luther can use, that power of detaining the soul over the beloved object and its loss. 50 years after Marjorie's death, her sister, writing to Dr. Brown, said, My mother was struck by the patient quietness manifested by Marjorie during this illness, unlike her ardent, impulsive nature. But love and poetic feeling were unquenched. When Dr. Johnstone 375 rewarded her submissiveness with a 6pence, the request speedily followed that she might get out ere New Year's Day came. When asked why she was so desirous of getting out, she immediately rejoined, Oh, I am so anxious to buy something with my 6pence for my dear Issa Keith. Again, when lying very still, her mother asked her if there was anything she wished. Oh yes, if you would just leave the room door open a wee bit and play the land o' the leal, and I will lie and think and enjoy myself. This is just as stated to me by her mother and mine. Well, the happy day came, alike to parents and child, when Marjorie was allowed to come forth from the nursery to the parlor. It was Sabbath evening and after tea. My father, who idolized this child and never afterward in my hearing mentioned her name, took her in his arms, and while walking her up and down the room, she said, "Father, I will repeat something to you. What would you like?" He said, "Just choose for yourself, matey." She hesitated for a moment between the paraphrase, "Few are thy days and full of woe," and the lines of Burns already quoted, but decided on the latter. A remarkable choice for a child. The repeating of these lines seemed to stir up the depths of feeling in her soul. She asked to be allowed to write a poem. There was a doubt whether it would be right to allow her, in case of hurting her eyes. She pleaded earnestly, just this once. The point was yielded, her slate was given her, and with great rapidity she wrote an address of 14 lines to my loved cousin on the author's recovery. 376. The cousin was Issa Keith. She went to bed apparently well, awoke in the middle of the night with the old cry of woe to a mother's heart. My head, my head. 3 days of the dire malady, water in the head, followed, and the end came. Permission to use the extracts quoted from Marjorie's journal in this article has been granted me by the publishers. Adam's soliloquy. The spirit of Adam is supposed to be visiting New York City, inspecting the dinosaur at the Museum of Natural History. 1905. 1. It is strange, very strange. I do not remember this creature. After gazing long and admiringly. Well, it is wonderful, the mere skeleton 57 feet long and 16 feet high. Thus far, it seems, they've found only this sample without doubt a merely medium-sized one. A person could not step out here into the park and happen by luck upon the largest horse in America. No, he would happen upon one that would look small alongside of the biggest Normandy. It is quite likely that the biggest dinosaur was 90 feet long and 20 feet high. It would be 5 times as long as an elephant. An elephant would be to it what a calf is to an elephant. The bulk of the creature, the weight of him, as long as the longest whale and twice the substance in him, and all good wholesome pork most likely, meat enough to last a village a year. Think of 100 of them in line, draped in shining cloth of gold. A majestic thing for a coronation procession, but expensive for he would eat much. Only kings and millionaires could afford him. I have no recollection of him. Neither Eve nor had heard of him until yesterday. We spoke to Noah about him. He colored and changed the subject. Being brought back to it and pressed a little, he confessed that in the matter of stocking the ark, the stipulations had not been carried out with absolute strictness, that is, in minor details, unessentials. There were some irregularities. He said the boys were to blame for this, the boys mainly, his own fatherly indulgence partly. They were in the giddy heyday of their youth at the time, the happy springtime of life. Their 100 years sat upon them lightly, and well, he had once been a boy himself, and he had not the heart to be too exacting with them. And so well, they did things they shouldn't have done, and he, to be candid, he winked. But on the whole, they did pretty faithful work, considering their age. They collected and stowed a good share of the really useful animals. And also, when Noah was not watching, a multitude of useless ones, such as flies, mosquitoes, snakes, and so on, but they did certainly leave ashore a good many creatures which might possibly have had value some time or other, in the course of time. Mainly these were vast saurians 100 feet long, and monstrous mammals, such as the megatherium and that sort, and there was really some excuse for leaving them behind, for 2 reasons. One, it was manifest that some time or other they would be needed as fossils for museums, and two, there had been a miscalculation, the ark was smaller than it should have been, and so there wasn't room for those creatures. There was actually fossil materia enough all by itself to freight 25 arks like that one. As for the dinosaur, but Noah's conscience was easy. It was not named in his cargo list, and he and the boys were not aware that there was such a creature. He said he could not blame himself for not knowing about the dinosaur, because it was an American animal, and America had not then been discovered. Noah went on to say, I did reproach the boys for not making the most of the room we had, by discarding trashy animals and substituting beasts like the mastodon, which could be useful to man in doing heavy work such as the elephant performs, but they said those great creatures would have increased our labors beyond our strength, in the matter of feeding and watering them, we being short-handed. There was something in that. We had no pump, there was but one window. We had to let down a bucket from that and haul it up a good 50 feet, which was very tiresome. Then we had to carry the water downstairs 50 feet again, in cases where it was for the elephants and their kind, for we kept them in the hold to serve for ballast. As it was, we lost many animals, choice animals that would have been valuable in menageries, different breeds of lions, tigers, hyenas, wolves, and so on, for they wouldn't drink the water after the salt sea water got mixed with the fresh. But we never lost a locust, nor a grasshopper, nor a weevil, nor a rat, nor a cholera germ, nor any of that sort of beings. On the whole, I think we did very well, everything considered. We were shepherds 380 and farmers. We had never been to sea before. We were ignorant of naval matters, and I know this for certain, that there is more difference between agriculture and navigation than a person would think. It is my opinion that the two trades do not belong together. Shem thinks the same, so does Japheth. As for what Ham thinks, it is not important. Ham is biased. You find me a Presbyterian that isn't if you think you can. He said it aggressively. It had in it the spirit of a challenge. I avoided argument by changing the subject. With Noah, arguing is a passion, a disease, and it is growing upon him, has been growing upon him for 30,000 years and more. It makes him unpopular, unpleasant. Many of his oldest friends dread to meet him. Even strangers soon get to avoiding him, although at first they are glad to meet him and gaze at him, on account of his celebrated adventure. For a time they are proud of his notice because he is so distinguished, but he argues them to rags, and before long they begin to wish, like the rest, that something had happened to the ark. Chapter 2. On the bench in the park, mid-afternoon, dreamily noting the drift of the human species back and forth. To think this multitude is but a wee little fraction of the earth's population, and all blood kin to me, every one. Eve ought to have come with me. This would excite her affectionate heart. She was never able to keep her composure when she came upon a relative. She would try to kiss every one of these 381 people, black and white and all. A baby wagon passes. How little change one can notice, none at all, in fact. I remember the first child, well, let me see. It is 300,000 years ago come Tuesday. This one is just like it. So between the first one and the last one there is really nothing to choose. The same insufficiency of hair, the same absence of teeth, the same feebleness of body and apparent vacancy of mind, the same general unattractiveness all around. Yet Eve worshipped that early one, and it was pretty to see her with it. This latest one's mother worships it. It shows in her eyes it is the very look that used to shine in Eve's. To think that so subtle and intangible a thing as a look could flit and flash from face to face down a procession 300,000 years long, and remain the same, without shade of change. Yet here it is, lighting this young creature's face just as it lighted Eve's in the long ago, the newest thing I have seen in the earth, and the oldest. Of course, the dinosaur, but that is in another class. She drew the baby wagon to the bench and sat down, and began to shove it softly back and forth with one hand, while she held up a newspaper with the other and absorbed herself in its contents. Presently, "My!" she exclaimed, which startled me, and I ventured to ask her, modestly and respectfully, what was the matter. She courteously passed the paper to me and said, pointing with her finger, "There it reads like fact, but I don't know." It was very embarrassing. I tried to look at my ease, and nonchalantly turned the paper this and that and the other way, but her eye was upon me, and I felt that I was not succeeding. Pretty soon she asked, hesitatingly, Can't you read?" I had to confess that I couldn't. It filled her with wonder. But it had one pleasant effect: it interested her in me, and I was thankful, for I was getting lonesome for someone to talk to and listen to. The young fellow who was showing me around on his own motion, I did not invite him, had missed his appointment at the museum, and I was feeling disappointed, for he was good company. When I told the young woman I could not read, she asked me another embarrassing question. "Where are you from?" I skirmished to gain time and position. I said, "Make a guess, see how near you can come." She brightened and exclaimed, "I shall dearly like it, sir, if you don't mind. If I guess right, will you tell me?" "Yes." "Honor bright." "Honor bright, what is that?" She laughed delightedly and said, "That's a good start. I was sure that that phrase would catch you. I know one thing now, all right, I know." "What do you know?" "That you are not an American, and you aren't, are you?" "No, you are right, I'm not honor bright as you say." 383, she looked immensely pleased with herself, and said, "I reckon I'm not always smart, but that was smart anyway. But not so very, after all, because I already believed I knew that you were a foreigner, by another sign." "What was that?" "Your accent." She was an accurate observer. I do speak English with a heavenly accent, and she had detected the foreign twang in it. She ran charmingly on, most naively and engagingly pleased with her triumph. The minute you said, "See how near you can come to it," I said to myself, 2 to 1 he is a foreigner and 10 to 1 he's English. Now that is your nationality, isn't it? I was sorry to spoil her victory, but I had to do it. You'll have to guess again. What, you are not an Englishman? No honor bright. She looked me searchingly over, evidently communing with herself, adding up my points. Then she said, "Well, you don't look like an Englishman, and that is true." After a little she added, "The fact is, you don't look like any foreigner, not quite like anybody I've seen before. I will guess some more." She guessed every country whose name she could think of and grew gradually discouraged. Finally she said, "You must be the man without a country, the 384 one the story tells about. You don't seem to have any nationality at all. How did you come to America? Have you any kinfolks here?" "Yes, several." "Oh, then you came to see them." "Partly, yes." She sat a while thinking, then, "Well, I'm not going to give up quite yet. Where do you live when you are at home, in a city or in the country?" "Which do you think?" "Well, I don't quite know. You do look a little countrified, if you don't mind my saying it, but you look a little citified, too, not much, but a little, although you can't read, which is very curious, and you are not used to newspapers. Now my guess is that you live mainly in the country when you are at home, and not very much in the city. Is that right?" "Yes, quite right." "Oh, good, now I'll take a fresh start." Then she wore herself to the bone, naming cities. No success. Next, she wanted me to help her a little with some pointers, as she phrased it. Was my city large? Yes. Was it very large? Yes. Did they have mobiles there? No. Electric light? No. Railroads, hospitals, colleges, cops? No. Why then, it's not civilized. Where can that place be? Be good and tell me just one peculiarity of it, then maybe I can guess. Well then, just one. It has gates of pearl. Oh, go along, that's the New Jerusalem. It isn't fair to joke. Never mind. I'll guess it yet. At 385 will come into my head pretty soon, just when I'm not expecting it. Oh, I've got an idea. Please talk a little in your own language, that'll be a good pointer. I accommodated her with a sentence or two. She shook her head despondently. No, she said, it doesn't sound human. I mean, it doesn't sound like any of these other foreigners. It's pretty enough, it's quite pretty, I think, but I'm sure I've not heard it before. Maybe if you were to pronounce your name, what is your name, if you'll be so good?" "Adam." "Adam." "Yes." "But Adam what?" "That is all, just Adam." "Nothing at all but just that? Why, how curious. There's plenty of Adams, how can they tell you from the rest?" "Oh, that is no trouble. I'm the only one there is there where I'm from." "Upon my word, well, it beats the band. It reminds a person of the old original. That was his name, too, and he hadn't any but that, just like you." Then, archly, "You've heard of him, I suppose?" "Oh yes, do you know him? Have you ever seen him?" "Seen him? Seen Adam? Thanks to goodness, no, it would scare me into fits." "I don't see why." "You do." 386 no. "Why don't you see why?" "Because there is no sense in a person being scared of his kin." "Kin?" "Yes, isn't he a distant relative of yours?" She thought it was prodigiously funny, and said it was perfectly true, but she never would have been bright enough to think of it. I found it a new and most pleasant sensation to have my wit admired, and was about to try to do some more when that young fellow came. He planted himself on the other side of the young woman, and began a vapid remark about the weather, but she gave him a look that withered him and got stiffly up and wheeled the baby away. Bible teaching and religious practice. Religion had its share in the changes of civilization and national character, of course. What share? The lion's. In the history of the human race, this has always been the case, will always be the case, to the end of time, no doubt, or at least until man, by the slow processes of evolution, shall develop into something really fine and high some billions of years hence, say. The Christian's Bible is a drugstore. Its contents remain the same, but the medical practice changes. For 1800 years, these changes were slight, scarcely noticeable. The practice was allopathic in its rudest and crudest form. The dull and ignorant physician day and night, and all the days and all the nights, drenched his patient with vast and hideous doses of the most repulsive drugs to be found in the store's stock. He bled him, cupped him, purged him, puked him, salivated him, never gave his system a chance to rally, nor nature a chance to help. He kept him religion sick for 18 centuries, and allowed him not a well day during all that time. The stock in the store was made up of about equal portions of baleful and debilitating poisons, and healing and comforting medicines, but the practice of the time confineth physician to the use of the former. By consequence, he could only damage his patient, and that is what he did. Not until far within our century was any considerable change in the practice introduced, and then mainly, or in effect only, in Great Britain and the United States. In the other countries today, the patient either still takes the ancient treatment or does not call the physician at all. In the English-speaking countries, the changes observable in our century were forced by that very thing just referred to, the revolt of the patient against the system. They were not projected by the physician. The patient fell to doctoring himself, and the physician's practice began to fall off. He modified his method to get back his trade. He did it gradually, reluctantly, and never yielded more at a time than the pressure compelled. At first he relinquished the daily dose of hell and damnation, and administered it every other day only. Next he allowed another day to pass, then another, and presently another. When he had restricted it at last to Sundays, and imagined that now there would surely be a truce, the homeopath arrived on the field and made him abandon hell and damnation altogether, and administered Christ's love and comfort and charity and compassion in its stead. These had been in the drugstore all the time, gold labeled and conspicuous among the long shelf loads of repulsive purges and vomits and poisons. And so, the practice was to blame that they had remained unused, not the pharmacy. To the ecclesiastical physician of 50 years ago, his predecessor 389 for 18 centuries was a quack. To the ecclesiastical physician of today, his predecessor of 50 years ago was a quack. To the everyman his own ecclesiastical doctor of when? What will the ecclesiastical physician of today be? Unless evolution, which has been a truth ever since the globes, suns, and planets of the solar system were but wandering films of meteor dust, shall reach a limit and become a lie, there is but one fate in store for him. The methods of the priest and the parson have been very curious, their history is very entertaining. In all the ages the Roman Church has owned slaves, bought and sold slaves, authorized and encouraged her children to trade in them. Long after some Christian peoples had freed their slaves, the Church still held on to hers. If any could know, to absolute certainty, that all this was right, and according to God's will and desire, surely it was she, since she was God's specially appointed representative in the earth and sole authorized and infallible expounder of his Bible. There were the texts, there was no mistaking their meaning. She was right, she was doing in this thing what the Bible had mapped out for her to do. So unassailable was her position that, in all the centuries, she had no word to say against human slavery. Yet now at last, in our immediate day, we hear a pope saying slave trading is wrong, and we see him sending an expedition to Africa to stop it. The texts remain, it is the practice that has changed. Why? Because the world has corrected the Bible. The Church never corrects it, and also never fails to drop in at the tail of the procession antake the credit of the correction, as she will presently do in this instance. Christian England supported slavery and encouraged it for 250 years, and her church's consecrated ministers looked on, sometimes taking an active hand, the rest of the time indifferent. England's interest in the business may be called a Christian interest, a Christian industry. She had her full share in its revival after a long period of inactivity, and this revival was a Christian monopoly. That is to say, it was in the hands of Christian countries exclusively. English parliaments aided the slave traffic and protected it. 2 English kings held stock in slave-catching companies. The first regular English slave hunter, John Hawkins, of still revered memory, made such successful havoc, on his second voyage, in the matter of surprising and burning villages, and maiming, slaughtering, capturing, and selling their unoffending inhabitants, that his delighted queen conferred the chivalric honor of knighthood on him, a rank which had acquired its chief esteem and distinction in other and earlier fields of Christian effort. The new knight, with characteristic English frankness and brusque simplicity, chose as his device the figure of a Negro slave, kneeling and in chains. Sir John's work was the invention of Christians, was to remain a bloody and awful monopoly in the hands of Christians for a quarter of a millennium, was to destroy homes, separate families, enslave friendless men and women, and break a myriad of human hearts, to the end that Christian nations might be prosperous and comfortable, 391 Christian churches be built, and the gospel of the meek and merciful Redeemer be spread abroad in the earth, And so, in the name of his ship, unsuspected but eloquent and clear, lay hidden prophecy. She was called the Jesus. But at last in England, an illegitimate Christian rose against slavery. It is curious that when a Christian rises against a rooted wrong at all, he is usually an illegitimate Christian, member of some despised and bastard sect. There was a bitter struggle, but in the end the slave trade had to go and went. The biblical authorization remained, but the practice changed. Then the usual thing happened. The visiting English critic among us began straightway to hold up his pious hands in horror at our slavery. His distress was unappeasable, his words full of bitterness and contempt. It is true we had not so many as 1,500,000 slaves for him to worry about, while his England still owned 12 millions in her foreign possessions. But that fact did not modify his wail any, or stay his tears, or soften his censure. The fact that every time we had tried to get rid of our slavery in previous generations, but had always been obstructed, balked, and defeated by England, was a matter of no consequence to him. It was ancient history, and not worth the telling. Our own conversion came at last. We began to stir against slavery. Hearts grew soft here, there, and yonder. There was no place in the land where the seeker could not find some small budding sign of 392 pity for the slave. No place in all the land but one the pulpit. It yielded at last, it always does. It fought a strong and stubborn fight, and then did what it always does, joined the procession at the tail end. Slavery fell. The slavery text remained, the practice changed, that was all.